everybody, welcome back to Chelsea Bakes. With the holiday season coming upon us shortly, I just wanted to touch base with a few of my favorite cookie recipes. It's one of my most favorite times of the year to bake. So today we're going to go over 3 of my favorite recipes that I like to add on my cookie trays for the holiday season. They're pretty popular among my family, and actually the first recipe, which are the Reese cup cookies, are one of my favorites. So first we're going to start with a half a cup of brown sugar. And I know you can make peanut butter cookies from the little packages like Betty Crocker, but I personally like to make everything from scratch. I think it has a better taste and they last a little bit longer, especially if you freeze them. If you need to make them a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance, they usually freeze pretty well for those 2 weeks. So then we're going to do a half a cup of white sugar. Then you're going to use 1 stick of salted butter or half a cup of salted butter. It's the same measurement. And I melted this in advance for the purpose of this show. Then you're going to want to add 1 egg. Next, we're going to add a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Usually when I'm making this by myself, I try to go just from memory and I just add vanilla straight from the bottle. Then you're going to add a half a cup of creamy peanut butter. I use the all natural, but regular is fine as well. And this is the most important ingredient, so don't forget it. So half a cup of creamy peanut butter. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to scrape it all, but make sure you get all of it. Sometimes it also helps to use a knife to get it off the spoon if you're having a little bit of trouble. So now you're going to want to mix the wet ingredients. Make sure you get a creamy consistency. These recipes that I'm showing you today are relatively simple. So they're good for the kids to help if your kids like to bake or if you're in a hurry for a Christmas or holiday party. So I usually mix it on a medium-high speed for about 30 seconds to a minute. You don't have to get it perfect. Just make sure everything has a creamy consistency. And this recipe usually yields about 2½ dozen cookies. So when you're buying your Reese peanut butter cups, you want to make sure you have enough for about 30. So you can see you're getting a creamy consistency. So you're going to want to set this off to the side, and then we're going to mix the dry ingredients. So for the dry ingredients, you're going to want to start with 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. And then you're gonna wanna add a half a teaspoon of salt. I usually use the sea salt because I like to have the coarse texture in my cookies. The recipe also yields that you can add a little bit more if you'd like, but I just do the half a teaspoon because I'm not big on salt. And you want to add 3/4 of baking soda, 3/4 a teaspoon. So I have a 1/4 teaspoon, I'm going to add 3 of these. And then just gently mix up the dry ingredients so they're all combined. Get your wet ingredients back and just add in the dry ingredients. Just dump the whole thing in. It mixes up pretty easily. Make sure you scrape down the sides of the bowl and get everything combined. It's a very sticky dough. Right, so to bake the cookies in the oven, you're going to want to preheat it to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And the cookies you'll need to bake for 8 to 10 minutes. I usually do around 9 minutes because they seem a little bit tough in my oven, but everybody's oven bakes a little bit differently, so just watch them between the 8 and 10 mark. This is a mini muffin tray. It's best for these cookies because you're gonna have to push the Reese cups down in, so it gives it a nice little cup for that. And then I use the 1-inch cookie scooper. Makes the process really easy and fast. So you just want to scoop it, and then I like to roll it in a little bit of a ball so it's a little bit tighter. Okay, so now we're going to put the cookies into the oven to bake for, again, 8 to 10 minutes on 350 degrees. And while those are in the oven, I usually like to unwrap my Reese cups and get them ready because you want to push them in while the cookies are still warm. That way they can fully set. So just unwrap the Reese cups. I usually count how many cookies I made and unwrap that many for that batch. Cookies have been in the oven for 8 to 10 minutes. We're going to take them out and put in the Reese cups. Ready to go. So then I just like to push them in right when they're still really hot because it makes it easier to put the Reese cups in the middle. And then once you have them all pushed in, you're going to want to let them sit and cool in the pan for probably about 10 to 15 minutes. And then I use a knife to pry the cookie out. It's really easy because this is a non-stick pan. But it makes it easier when you have these Reese cups already unwrapped because then they're ready to go to push right in the center. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the second recipe for today, which is the infamous Hershey Kiss cookie, or also known as the peanut butter blossoms. Now, I used to actually make this cookie with just the prepackaged peanut butter mix where you pretty much just add water and an egg or milk and an egg until I discovered this recipe, and now I'm addicted to it and I'll never turn back. So this recipe is really similar to the Reese Cup one. There's a few minor tweaks to the ingredients and measurements that'll make it a little bit different. The textures are completely different. The Reese Cup cookie tends to be a little bit thicker and dense. This is very crumbly and it melts in your mouth, and it's one of my favorite recipes again. So the first thing we're gonna start with is actually 1 stick or a half a cup of unsalted butter. So in the last recipe we used salted. This recipe you wanna use unsalted butter, a stick or a half a cup, same measurements. So after you add your butter, you want to add 1/3 a cup of brown sugar. That's another difference. The sugar's cut back a little bit in this recipe, but they still taste just as sweet. And then you're going to want to do 1/3 a cup of white sugar. Next, you're going to want to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. I always add a little bit extra in this recipe to make it a tad bit sweeter. Then you're going to want to add the peanut butter, the creamy peanut butter again. I use the natural, 3/4 a cup. So I only had a cup, I filled it partially. This is another difference between the last recipe we just made with the Reese cups. It only has a half a cup of peanut butter. This one has 3/4 a cup. Make sure you scrape all the sides, all of the peanut butter added. Then you're going to add 1 large egg. Then you're going to want to combine all the wet ingredients. So again, you're going to want to make sure you have a creamy consistency. And on a medium speed. So once all of those ingredients are combined, you're going to want to add 2 tablespoons of milk. You definitely want to mix all the ingredients and then add the milk. And combine. So for your dry ingredients, you're going to want 1.5 cups of all-purpose baking flour. And then 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I also found you don't have to measure this perfectly. If you just want to sprinkle it in, that works just as well. Okay, then you're going to want to combine the dry ingredients. Make sure it's mixed up well. And then add to the wet ingredients. scrape down the sides, make sure you get it mixed well. This dough is definitely stickier than the last one, and that's a good thing. Okay, so with your 1-inch scooper again, you're gonna wanna scoop the dough into little 1-inch dough balls. And this dough is a lot stickier, so be careful when you're forming it into the dough balls. And then you wanna dip it in white sugar or a turbinado sugar. I always use just the white sugar. And again, this recipe yields about 2.5, 3 dozen. Sometimes I make the cookies a little bigger than an inch. Okay, so next we're going to want to put the cookies into the oven for again 8 to 10 minutes. So just like the Reese Cup cookies, I like to unwrap the Hershey Kisses while the cookies are baking because it makes it easier to set them on top before they cool. So from the first episode of Chelsea Bakes, you might remember we made Lucy cut out sugar cookies in the shape of my dog. So for Christmas, these are definitely popular amongst all my friends, all my family, everybody I know loves these cookies. It's my aunt's recipe. I already baked the cookies in advance, so you can reference the recipe if you wanted to go back and actually make them from scratch on the Armstrong One Wire YouTube page, or you can just use the pre-packaged sugar cookie mix, whatever you feel. But I am going to review the icing briefly with you because that is what actually gives the cookie its great flavor. So for the icing, you would want to use a half a stick of melted salted butter, and then 3/4 a cup of Crisco, and you're gonna wanna mix that and make sure it has a creamy consistency. And then once you have that all mixed together, you wanna add a pound of powdered sugar, and then 4 to 5 tablespoons of milk, and about a teaspoon, maybe a little more, I usually just wing it and pour it in, of vanilla extract. And then mix that all together, and you'll come up with this delicious consistency for icing. And I put them in 12-inch piping bags, and use the star tip for icing them. You can certainly just spread it on with a butter knife or a spatula as well. However, if you want them to look special or pretty, if you're giving them as a gift, the star tips, I highly recommend them. So I'm just gonna decorate a few to give a little recap on how to decorate them with the piping tip. So first we'll do a Christmas tree. Add a little bit of sugar glitter. Naturally, glitter is one of my favorite things of the holiday season, so I have to add it on my cookies. So the Hershey Kiss cookies finished up baking while we were icing the first cookies. So while they're still warm on the pan, you're just going to add the Hershey Kiss in the center. And then I usually let them cool for about 10 minutes on the pan before I transfer them into a baking container where I store the treats to be frozen or on a cookie tray. So we're gonna finish practicing the icing of the cookies. Next, we're gonna move on to a snowflake. So again, this is very time consuming, but I like how it makes the cookies look. But again, you can also use the spatula if you're just doing it for the taste. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed the holiday special of Chelsea Bakes, and I hope that you enjoy some of these recipes, maybe even make some new traditions for your own holiday parties. Bye!